Incarceration rates in America has been a problem, especially as opposed to minorities. And Roman delves into the issues around the legal system. Do you think we've made any headway?
And I think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, "Yeah, they're little yummies." I said, "Who?" He said, "Little yummies. Look up, Google Little Yummy." Little Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer.
Wow.
And you look at his picture, you'll see the headshot of him. He's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Who's doing life now, a 16-year-old.
Makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father? It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And
Robert Yummy Sandifer, born March 12th of 1983, was an 11-year-old American street gang member from Chicago, Illinois. Robert Sandifer was murdered by fellow gang members in Chicago, and this event garnered national attention because of his age, resulting in him appearing on the cover of Time magazine in September of 1994. Robert Sandifer was the last child of 9, born of Rahbinah Sanderford, who had over 30 arrests while prostituting, many of which drug-related. A social worker who oversaw Rahbinah Sanderford and her children even said that there is no reason to believe that Rahbinah Sanderford will ever be able to adequately meet her own needs, let alone the needs of her growing family. When Robert was taken away from his mother and given to his grandmother, Janie Fields, the juvenile court concluded that her prognosis as a caregiver wasn't much more promising. The psychiatric report described Fields as very controlling and domineering. Sandifer was physically abused from the time he was an infant. Before he was 3 years old, Sandifer was already known to the Department of Children and Family Services. Physical examinations showed that Sandifer was alleged to have cigarette burns on his arms and neck, as well as a linear bruising consistent with physical beatings.
What you think, what kind of guy he was? He was a kid? Yeah. How old was he?
Many in the neighborhood where Robert lived had much to say about him. In the Time article about Robert, people said that he was a bully and that he smelled and he was of a different breed. Others recall a sweeter side. Lulu Washington sells discount candy out of her house just across from Yummy's, and he just wanted love, she says. For that, he could be disarmingly kind. He'd say thank you, excuse me, pardon me. He loved animals and basketball, and the way with bicycles. He even once managed to merge 2 bikes into a single, working in tandem. Those were the good times. His home with his grandmother was in a working class neighborhood, and the residents dealt with the growth of gangs in their neighborhood. One in particular that Robert would soon join, the Black Disciples. The Black Disciples was prominent in Chicago at the time, and several thousand or so gang members in Chicago were spread out across separate fiefdoms, led by ministers in their 30s and 40s who were always recruiting children. A Black disciple named Keith, 17, describes the role the youngest members play. He's a small little punk, but he wants a name, right? So you make him do the work. Hey, homie, go get me a red sports car, by tonight. I'm taking my woman out. Or, hey, homie, go find me $50. Or, hey, homie, you want to be big? Go pop that dude who's messing with our business.
How long did you know him?
Since I've been staying about a year.
From children and the community in the Chicago neighborhood of Roseland. He liked luxury cars and remarkably was able to drive them despite his small size. Many of his 23 felonies and 5 misdemeanors were committed in the course of running errands for street gangs. The penal system had no way to keep him out of trouble, and the courts were helpless to lock him away because he was too young for the juvenile detention system and too dangerous to be placed with children his age. Robert averaged a felony a month for the last year and a half of his life. Ann O'Callahan, a lawyer and assistant public guardian, met Robert once last December in court. She was astounded by his size and demeanor. Some of these kids we represent are ominous characters, but I have never had to bend over and I was like, hi, my name is Ann and I'm your lawyer. I couldn't believe it. Robert wasn't the least intimidated by the courtroom. It was like he was just sitting there waiting for the bus. On August 28th, 1994, Robert was ordered to do a favor for his gang. He opened fire several times with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, striking several youths. Robert quickly fled the scene. Among the victims was a 14-year-old Siobhan Dean, who was hit by a stray bullet and later died from her gunshot wounds. The crime spree made national headlines. The nation was shocked by the brutality of the crime and the fact that the alleged perpetrator was 11 years old. The Chicago police began a manhunt for Robert And according to Sergeant Palmer of the Chicago Police, Robert's actions were a gang initiation gone wrong. Robert spent the last 3 days of his life on the run. Gang members shuttled him between safe houses and abandoned buildings as the police swooped down on the neighborhood, searching for the shooter, followed by a flock of reporters. Robert was terrified for his life. He didn't understand why the police were after him, and his grandmother was worried about his safety and called him on the payphone to ask about his whereabouts, and he would answer crying and asking his grandmother if he could come back home. Robert managed to find his way back to his neighborhood and to his neighbor's house. Robert, visibly frightened, asked his neighbor if he could call his grandmother so he could turn himself in. He asked if he could say a prayer together. The neighbor went to go make the call, and when she came back, he was gone. The police can only guess what happened next. On August 31st, while hiding at a home of a neighbor, Robert was met by brothers Craig and Derek Hardaway, ages 16 and 14, members of the Black Disciple Street Gang. Robert was told that he was being taken to a safe location and ordered into a waiting car. Instead, he was brought to a railroad underpass at East 108th Street and South Dolphin Avenue and was told to get on his knees. While on his knees, he was shot twice in the back of the head by the Hardaway brothers.
All of the children that are standing here, looking down.
All right. Basically, as you saw, this is about Robert Yummy Sandifer. He was a young gang member who ended up being murdered as a result of a botched killing. And that was supposedly his gang initiation or his initiation into a gang. So let me pull up his chart, and I'm going to discuss some of the factors that led to this situation, some of the astrological factors. Now, Yummy was born on March 12, 1983, and that 12 is a number of sacrifice and victim. And his life path number was 27, that breaks down to 9, and 9 life path numbers could lead a life that is peppered with violence. They could be hard-headed, not everyone, but in certain cases. It also points to the guns. Now, 2 and 7, 2 is the mother, and 7 can represent neglect, but it can also represent addiction. So his mother was a drug addict, which is a big part of the cause of this whole situation. As you can see, his sun and Mercury are in Pisces, and that Pisces theme is coinciding with or just echoing the sacrifice and victim, because Pisces rules sacrifice as well as victimization. Also, the themes of neglect, being lost or feeling lost, hiding out, theft. As you saw in the documentary, he was a car thief, and that's very much Mercury in Pisces. Mercury rules cars, Pisces rules theft. But his aunt had said that he was an artist, he could draw, and that's very much Pisces as well. The fear that he experienced once he was on the run, that's very Pisces. And the fact that he was very impressionable to that street life, being very impressionable is a Pisces trait as well. Now, Yummy had Mercury squaring his Jupiter and Uranus in Sagittarius. So that points to him being heavily influenced by a group of people, or you could say his so-called friends. The group in question is the Black Disciples in his case. And also it's funny that in that documentary, the guy narrating it, he said that the ministers of the Black Disciples, that makes me think of that Sagittarius theme, just the fact that he used ministers. Now, Mercury squaring Jupiter and Uranus in Sagittarius can produce ADHD-like symptoms. So more than likely he was hyperactive, very high strung. He was basically rebellious, wild, a loose cannon type of child. And he dropped out of school, which is very Mercury squaring Jupiter and Uranus in Sagittarius. His Mars 11th degree of Aries, and he was murdered at age 11. So, like I said before, the degrees in the chart can even point to ages when events occur. But also, he was shot twice in the head, which is indicative of that 11 too, because 11 breaks down to 2. He had Venus in Aries, and that's him being in possession of a gun, but also doing things in order to be initiated. And he has Venus opposition Pluto, so that's like him being put up to do certain things, him being pressured to do certain things that would cause him to be initiated in the gang, him being pressured to shoot those people, basically, with Venus opposing Pluto in Libra. But that also points to the law being after him as well once he shot those 3 kids, and one of the kids died. The girl that you saw in the picture, her name was Siobhan. So people said that he was a bully, and that's pointing to his Venus sesqui-square Uranus, but also the fact that he had that Mercury squaring Jupiter conjoined to Uranus as well. Again, just being a loose cannon type of individual. That Aquarius moon can also come into play with him being a bully as well. Aquarius being the sign of the bully. Now, if he was born much later in the day, that moon would be in Pisces, but I believe it's in Aquarius, especially when you look at his mother. So in the documentary about Yummy, there is a clip of his mother, and one of the news people, they are asking the mother questions, and the mother seems totally detached. Like she's talking about her own son like he's a stranger. And moon in Aquarius can deal with a mother that is detached. And oftentimes with the moon in Aquarius, there is a separation from the mother. So he was separated from his mother through Child Protective Services at a young age once they found out that he was being abused. So moon square Chiron can deal with him being part of a dysfunctional family, him basically being in this dysfunctional household, but also his mother losing custody of him because that Chiron is in Taurus. And I'm also looking at that moon square Chiron in Taurus as him not getting either enough to eat or proper nutrition growing up. He probably was raised on a bunch of convenience foods and snack foods. And his name was Yummy, his nickname. And that was because he loved cookies. So maybe cookies and cakes and pies and potato chips, maybe that was the bulk of his diet. It's interesting that one of the reporters in the documentary asked his aunt what he liked to eat. I just thought that was very interesting. Now, it was said that one of the social workers said that when he was 3 years old, he was already a psychopath. And that makes me think of his Saturn at the 3rd degree of Scorpio, because Scorpio is the sign of the psychopath, and Saturn is dealing with the authorities. Also, he had Saturn conjoined to Pluto, and that right there is him being influenced by that criminal element, but also where he could have looked at the older members of the Black disciples as like quasi-father figures, the wrong kind of father figures, but we do know that he did need a father figure. His father was in prison most of his life, if not all of his life. And that points to his South Node in Capricorn being conjoined to Neptune. So that's representing his father being in prison. And also, if you notice, that South Node is at the 0 degree of Capricorn. That's known as the Aries Point. And the Aries Point of a cardinal sign can produce heavily fated circumstances, external factors that affects the person's life. And with that South Node being conjoined to Neptune, basically, he was set up to fail. You can say he really didn't have a chance at life, considering his environment. Now, you can have somebody with a similar chart or the same chart, and they be born in a different environment, and maybe it won't impact them so bad. But the fact that he was born in that environment, raised in that environment, and both of his parents weren't in his life, again, his father being in prison, which is evidenced by that South Node in Capricorn, could join to Neptune. And if you notice, he has the 29th degree twice in his chart. Neptune at the 29th degree of Sagittarius, Pluto at the 29th degree of Libra. And that 29th degree can produce high pressure situations, can produce conflicts. He also had his Black Moon Lilith at the 29th degree of Capricorn. A lot of times the 29th degree will produce some type of conflict with the mother, some type of conflict with home as well. You can also look at that Capricorn South Node as him having to grow up too fast, especially since it's at the Aries point of Capricorn. Also, that Neptune influence upon the Capricorn South Node is just pointing to the themes of neglect, abandonment, the fear that he experienced when he was on the run, him trying to hide out, and basically him being dealt some heavy karma, him being a victim of his circumstances. Now, his North Node at the Aries point of Cancer is pointing to his mother's influence and how she was unfit to be a mother, as evidenced by the Cancer North Node opposing Neptune. And Neptune's in Sagittarius. That's representative of the social worker, basically saying that the mother would probably never be equipped to raise her children. And the mother basically getting locked up all those times on the prostitution charges that were drug related. That's very much that Neptune opposing the Cancer North Node. So again, he didn't have much of a chance at all with both of his parents being represented by those nodes and both of them not giving a damn about their son. Or maybe I couldn't say the father per se, but he was in prison and he couldn't be there. The mom, she damn sure didn't give a damn either. But that Cancer North Node also points to the Black disciples, the gang. Because I always say gangs are ruled by Cancer because they're like a quasi family. But the whole theme of gangsterdom or being a gangster, that's Scorpio. But the gang itself, which is like a family, that's Cancer. So that Cancer theme comes into play with him basically adopting the Black disciples as his quasi family. But again, when you go back to that Neptune opposing the Cancer North Node, it's showing that he couldn't even trust his makeshift family, the Black disciples. They basically did him in. They basically made it seem like they were going to protect him, and instead they executed him. So this is just a really tragic story. And his chart basically shows it. And again, those 29th degrees, conflict with the mother, conflict with home, being under high pressure situations. Again, this kid didn't have much of a chance. So it basically just shows you that life is heavily fated. And some people are really dealt bad hands from the start, like Yummy. But you have to ask yourself, is this something that he brought on from a past life? So let me know in the comments section. Do you believe in, reincarnation to the point where like little kids that have to suffer in this lifetime, was it because they did something really horrible in a past life and they have to pay for that? Or could you say maybe the purpose of Yummy's life was to be a cautionary tale for any other children or even adults that have children to really be careful and to really try to walk the straight and narrow? So let me know what you think, because this situation, stories like this really do like pull at my heartstrings, because I'm like, okay, what was his purpose upon this earth? Was it for him to suffer because he did something in a past life, or was his short life to be a lesson for other people? Maybe it's a combination of both. But yeah, so I wanted to just present this story because it really touched my heart when I found out about it a few years ago. And I just saw a clip of it recently and I was like, oh, let me pull this boy's chart and let me discuss the factors. And again, I wasn't surprised when I saw those nodes like that. Capricorn South Node, Cancer North Node, his parents. Again, when parents failed him, But the system failed him as well, because as you see, he had about 23 felonies, 5 misdemeanors, and they're still letting this little kid run wild. How did they even allow that to happen? So it just shows you that, yeah, if your parents ain't there for you, you can't expect the system to be there for you. Even if he was in foster care, he could have still been a victim. And he probably would have been, because a lot of foster care kids, they do become abused, whether it's physically, sexually, or both. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section. I'll be back with some more videos. Peace.